Are you ready to grow your podcast and build your legacy? Hi, I'm Pauletta Rado. I'm a podcaster just like you, and I'm inviting you to join us on October 23rd and 24th for the free Latinas in Podcasting Virtual Summit. You don't have to be Latina to attend. It's 2 days of hands-on tips and proven tactics that deliver real results. We promise you'll leave inspired and with a concrete game plan. So don't wait. Register now for the free Latinas in Podcasting Virtual Summit on October 23rd and 24th. There's a link in the show notes. Nos vemos!
You finally worked up the courage to ask for letters of recommendation for grad school. 2 people say yes without hesitation. Then the third one agrees, but there's an unexpected twist. They ask you to write the letter yourself. At this point, you're probably freezing because you're thinking about how you've never written one before, and the thought of writing a letter where you're praising yourself feels awkward, maybe icky, or just completely impossible. So what do you do? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome to the award-winning Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen BIPOCs to listen in on inclusive grad school stories and learn about personal development and productivity tips. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Vu, a certified coach, consultant, and author, and I will be serving as your Femtor, providing you with insider knowledge to help you reach your personal and professional goals. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Doctora Yvette. Today, we are going to cover a very common scenario that sometimes leaves students confused, overwhelmed, or feeling a little bit frustrated. What do you do when you have been asked to write your own letter of recommendation for grad school? And we're not just going to talk about the situation and why this happens. I am also going to share some steps. I'm going to give you an idea about the structure to follow. I'm going to give you some reflection prompts. The key here is so that you can walk away with an idea of how to move forward with writing a letter, even if you've never done that before. So let's get into it. I want to start with sharing a little bit more about why this situation comes up in the first place. So why are professors asking students to write their own letters? Well, if you haven't noticed already, your professors are very busy. They are balancing huge workloads. The workload never ends. It's only getting worse. Not only do they have to teach, but they have research commitments. They've got service work. They're likely writing grants and mentoring or advising a number of students, could even be a dozen students. And every year they're asked to write multiple letters from multiple students. Let's assume it's 10 to 12 letters for 10 to 12 students. That's a lot of time and effort. So what some recommenders will do to simplify the process for themselves is they're willing to write a letter on your behalf, but they want you to help them out first by delegating the task of writing that first draft for them. And I know that it probably feels uncomfortable or unfair, but who knows you and your accomplishments better than you do, right? This professor knows you to a certain extent, but again, it gives you some power in a sense because it shifts the control over to you. You get to decide what actually goes into the letter, which can work in your favor because not all letters are the same. And some letters that professors write are not very strong and can actually hurt you more than they help you. So while it is extra labor, it gives you an opportunity to reflect on your strengths, reflect on your achievements, and learn how to write in a very different writing style. This is a very different type of writing to write a letter of recommendation. So let's talk about how do you even get started with this? Because I know at this point you're probably thinking, hold up, hold up. How do they even expect me to write a letter like this? I've never done this before. Am I even qualified to write a letter like this? Is it going to seem like I'm bragging? How do I know if it's too much or not enough? Trust me, I've been there. I think I started writing letters of recommendations for students when I was a graduate student. I must have been as early as my first year as a grad student. And if you don't know this about me, I went straight in out of college into a PhD program. And that first year, I started mentoring undergrads. And in that role, thankfully, I had the opportunity to sit on the review committee for the Mellon Mays undergraduate research program. And in that role, I was able to see the applications that were submitted and help to select the finalists. And in that opportunity, I got to see what good letters and not so good letters look like. So it was my first time actually reading letters of recommendation. And by the next year, my second year in graduate school, I started TAing, and that's when I started to get requests to write letters of recommendation. So it was really, really helpful for me having seen these letters, becoming more familiar with the structure and how they look and sound. It was easier for me to write my first letter. And even though I had this information, even though I knew what they looked like, I still questioned my ability to write a strong letter. I still felt like I wasn't qualified enough. And of course, when I wrote these letters, I made sure that professors would co-sign with me because I don't recommend getting a letter of recommendation from a graduate student alone. You want a professor to also sign off on it. It makes a difference. Who writes your letter actually means something when you're applying to graduate school. But in this case, I just want to affirm that feeling that if you're feeling like, how can I write it? I'm not qualified enough. I've never done this before. How dare they ask me to do this? That feeling is very, very real. It's very common. Okay, so let's talk about what do you do? Let's say you're in this situation. And I know of at least one listener who is in this situation because it's the reason why I decided to record this episode. I don't even know why I haven't recorded on this topic before because it comes up every single year. And recently, one of my clients, this came up for her where she asked for letters of rec. One of her recommenders asked her to write it. And she brought up this question. And I replied to her in a voice memo, but it was a very brief voice memo. And I thought to myself, this topic deserves a longer conversation. And of course, I'm going to be sending her the episode first so that she can check it out. And you all also get to hear it after her, shortly after her, as soon as I publish this, because I want you to know what to do. So first things first, ask for sample letters. Yes, it makes a big difference in helping you to write something when you know what it's supposed to look and sound like. This is one of the things that frustrates me in terms of pedagogy and the way certain professors teach, that some of us learn by seeing, by having a model of what something looks like. It doesn't mean that if you have a sample that you are going to plagiarize it or copy it. It just means it gives you an idea of what to work toward. And so in this case, if you've never seen a letter of recommendation, if you've never read one, and I'm assuming you haven't because you haven't applied to graduate school yet. So in what circumstance would you have read a letter of recommendation for graduate school? But it helps. It helps to see what these sample letters look like. And I know you're probably thinking, well, even asking for a sample letter is awkward and uncomfortable. So what do I do? You can ask for sample letters from mentors you trust, advisors, grad students, anyone you know that's in academia who has written a strong letter before. And when you ask, you can ask them, would you be open to sharing an anonymous sample recommendation letter with me so that I can see what a successful and strong letter looks like? I want to follow best practices as I write my own. It's totally okay to ask. The worst thing that happens is that someone says that they don't have one or they're not comfortable sharing one, and then you move on to someone else. But I want you to have at least 1 or 2 letters that you can refer to as samples so that you can see what they look like. And no, I don't recommend using AI for this because I know some of you might be thinking this. Well, if I don't get a sample letter, I can just ask AI to generate a sample for me. And nothing compares to seeing someone's writing and a letter that's written from an actual professor. I have a lot of mixed feelings about the use of AI. And I know a lot of y'all in my audience, some of you are, anywhere on the spectrum in terms of using AI regularly to not using it at all. But in this case, I highly, highly recommend getting actual samples and not relying on AI for this. You need to see what real letters look like. The next thing I'm going to share, which is, I'm assuming, probably going to be the most helpful part of this episode, is sharing with you a sample structure and the ideal length for your letter. Because again, how do you know how to write it if you don't know what you're working toward? So typically when I've read recommendation letters, when I've written recommendation letters, they're about 1 to 2 pages single spaced. So 1 full page single spaced or up to 2 full pages single spaced. Anything shorter than that, and I've seen short paragraphs where that's the whole letter of recommendation, it doesn't come across as strong. It actually does the opposite. And I remember the first time I saw a weak letter of recommendation and I got mad. I was reviewing applications for the research fellowship that I was working for, and there was one letter. All the other ones, you could see they were 1 to 2 pages. They were full. The page was full. This one had 2-3 lines, and it barely even reached the halfway mark on the page. I was so mad. I think it made it worse that I knew this professor and had been considering asking them to be on my dissertation committee. And after that, I was like, oh, hell no. I am not asking this person to be in my committee because I would hate to have someone write a letter like that for me. So I'd rather you say no. I'd rather professors tell you no if they seriously can't write you a strong letter than waste their time and yours writing you a weak letter. Don't do that to yourself. Don't write 1 paragraph and think that you're done. It needs to be longer than that. I want to take a quick pause in today's episode to share some exciting updates. My one-on-one coaching and consulting spots are fully booked for the fall, but I'm now accepting new clients for January 2026. I'll have just 2 openings at the start of the year, so if you've been thinking about working with me, now is a great time to reserve your spot. You can book a call through the link in the show notes. And if you want to begin working with me even sooner, keep an eye out on my group coaching program, the Grad Empowerment Coaching Circle, which is open on a rolling basis. By joining my waitlist, you'll be the first to know when a spot opens up, and you'll get the chance to build sustainable productivity systems and strategies, as well as career insights in a community space meant for other first-gen and BIPOC grad students and professionals like you. So if you're ready for one-on-one coaching, or if you'd like to be part of a more supportive group coaching space, you can find both links in the show notes. Now let's talk about the structure. So with the structure, typically you have your opening. It's a short paragraph where you will start with a greeting and you introduce yourself and your relationship to the person. So in this case, it's a bit awkward because you're writing as if you are the professor. So you're writing from their point of view. So you introduce yourself as the professor and your relationship with the student, which is you. So how do they know you? For how long? You can mention their credentials or their title. You can mention how they met you. Maybe they met you in a class because you were taking their class. Maybe they met you because you became their research assistant. Maybe they met you because you showed up at office hours and someone else recommended that you meet them. I don't know the context, but you want to share a little bit of that context about how they met you, how long they've known you. And yeah, I'm thinking about an example here. Usually I'll see someone say, like, I've had the opportunity to work with Anna for the last 2 years, or I've had the pleasure of serving as a faculty mentor for Anna for the last year and a half, or you name it, just sharing a little bit more about how you know this person and how long you have known them. That's typically what I've seen in these openings. Next are the body paragraphs, and this is where you go into showcasing your accomplishments, your strengths, what makes you stand out. A lot of time professors will start with whatever is most notable. So it might be, if they're your faculty mentor, they will talk about your undergraduate research project and what they've seen you do with that project. Or if you know them in the context of them being your professor for a class, then they'll talk about how you were as a student in that class and any like notable project or assignment, etc., if you were participating. So when it comes down to writing strong body paragraphs, I tell this to all of my clients when they're writing their statements of purpose, and they're going to know because I say this all the time. I always tell them, focus on the what and the how and the so what. What and the how and the so what. In other words, another more popular way of saying this is focusing on the problem, the action, the result. So the what is, what did you do? What did you study? What class did you take, etc. So context. The how, that's the action. That's the skills that you gained. That's what you actually did. What was your role in the lab? So that's the how, or the action if you're thinking about problem, action, result, or if you're thinking about the what, the how, the so what. And then the last thing is the result or the notable outcome. So what? Why does this matter? What was the impact? And so instead of just saying, oh, Brian was a very hard worker in my class, that says nothing to me. Instead, you can say, in my seminar, Brian identified gaps in our data set and independently designed his own survey to gather responses from over 36 participants. His analysis strengthened our project, and by the end of the course, he completed a 15-page research paper. I'm giving you examples of the level of detail that you want to add. So you want to give us that detail. So give us that context. Tell us what you did, how you did it, and any notable outcomes. By notable outcomes, I mean, so what was the end result? Did you present your work? Did you publish anything? Did you write a paper? Did you win an award? So share those things. Aside from talking about your academic achievements, especially if you are first gen or if you are a member of a historically excluded population, then you might want to add more context. And this is where I've seen in letters, and I've done this too in the letters that I've written, you write a little bit more about the student's background. If they're first gen, sharing a little bit more about your backstory. But only do this if you know that this professor knows this about you. So if you've developed that type of relationship where they know more about your personal backstory, then you can share that. If not, you can also lean into other experiences. It doesn't have to be your personal backstory. It could be talking about extracurricular involvements that highlight your leadership skills or your growth. It could be anything related to community engagement, advocacy work, etc. So this is also an area where you can talk about this. Sometimes professors will comment on a gap too. So this is where, again, the contextualizing can help. So if you know that you're concerned about a low GPA, or if you know that you're concerned about the GRE is required and you got a low score in the GRE, you can have the professor add a paragraph, a short paragraph about that, about what happened and how it's not a sign of your potential, and instead what is a sign of your potential. And it's up to you if you want to write about this. You don't have to, but know that this is a strategy that comes up a lot, is sometimes some professors will comment on those gaps and mention it or reframe it in a way where it's not a negative thing. And instead, they prioritize or focus on the things that do showcase your strengths and your potential. So besides the opening, besides the body paragraphs that showcase your academic and professional experiences, and then besides any other contextual paragraphs around your personal backstory, around community involvement, extracurriculars, leadership experiences, then you get to the closing. The closing is also very short, similar to the opening, where might be 1 or 2 lines. You express that, again, with enthusiasm or without hesitation. You endorse the student, which is yourself, or you recommend the student for admission into this doctoral program. And you share why. You can share some traits. You can share some characteristics that this person has, the intellect or the drive or the resilience or the you name it, to make important contributions to the field and so forth. So a very short but enthusiastic or very supportive closing. And then, of course, you have the closing. In the letter, you need to have your closing salutation. So you include the professor's name and their title and their contact info. So that's the typical structure: your opening, your body paragraphs, and your closing. It's in a letter format. You don't have to worry about anything else because at the end of the day, this is a draft, right? So don't forget that this is not the final version. It is the professor's responsibility to revise it, to make sure that it sounds like them, that they might need to change some sections if they feel like maybe they want to enhance it or strengthen it or you name it. So it doesn't have to be perfect, is what I'm saying. And you don't have to have it formatted exactly in the right way, but as long as you have that rough structure of a letter structure with your opening. So, dear members of the admissions committee, and then you start with your opening, then you go into the body sections, and then you have your closing with the professor's title and contact info. You should be good to go. One last thing I want to mention, this is just a heads up, is I want you to, when you have your draft, go back and double check the language and the tone of your letter. Why? Because some of us, especially those of us that are first gen and from immigrant backgrounds, we've been taught to be very humble. And in doing so, sometimes we minimize our achievements. And sometimes we might even say things in a way that make them sound more negative than positive. So let me give an example. Like, I've seen students write about themselves where they'll say, well, even though I don't have formal research experience, I have worked on these other projects. And I'm like, let's not start with even though I don't have, because you're starting with a negative and you're making it seem like you're starting with highlighting a deficit when it's not, because you still have research experience. It just looks different. So I want you to keep an eye out on that, on like deficit language or humble language, because this can come up a lot, where a lot of times those of us that come from historically excluded backgrounds, people will often think about us in terms of our hard work and our kindness and how resilient we are, instead of spotlighting other areas that are just as strong, if not more, like how brilliant we are or how much of a leader we are. So just keep an eye out on that and lean into using language that is affirming and that is strengths-based. So instead of saying, despite her challenges as a first-gen student, you can say instead, I'm trying to think about a name, Julia's perspective as a first-gen student fuels her commitment to equity in educational research, making her an asset to any academic community. So again, it's about reframing. Instead of starting with the negative or with a challenge, you instead reframe that as a strength. Being a first-gen student is a strength. Just as much as it comes with challenges, it is a strength. And in this case, you want to highlight the strengths. So keep an eye out on that. I know that's hard to pinpoint right away. I know we have our own tendencies and habits to write a certain way, to talk about ourselves in a certain way. So I know this is not easy. And if it's really, really hard for you, I highly, highly recommend you reach out to someone else for their honest feedback. And that's the last thing I'm going to say, just as a recommendation or as a suggestion, is once you have a full draft, please, please don't just keep it to yourself. You want to share it with someone else before you send it back to your recommender. Maybe that's another student. Maybe it's a grad student who you trust. Maybe it's another mentor who you trust. The point is that other people can pinpoint some areas that you can strengthen much better than you can. And again, I don't want you to freak out. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's only the first draft. This is more of a collaboration than anything else. This is not the final draft, but it can help, make you feel a little less concerned and a little more reassured if you have someone else take a look at it before you send it out. All right, so that was all that I wanted to share. And just before I end this episode, I just want to give you a couple of additional reflection prompts and a checklist of things to go through before you finish your first draft. So first, you want to ask yourself, again, this is just to brainstorm and give you ideas on what to write about. What concrete strengths and qualities have I shown in my academic work, professional work, or community-based work? What anecdotes or personal stories can I share that best illustrate my growth, my values, my characteristics, or my impact? You can also ask yourself, how has my background shaped my contributions? Not just obstacles, not just challenges, but the sources of my strengths? And have I reviewed at least one trusted sample letter, a letter that you trust is a strong letter, to check my own for similar structure and tone? And then your final checklist is, before you send it off, is this letter at least one page single spaced? Does it use language that is not vague or generic and instead is using strong, specific language with detailed examples? Does this draft avoid deficit framing or humble language? And does this letter clearly communicate my fit and readiness for this program? That's also something that I want to mention that I don't really think I went into detail when I talked about the structure of the letter. Is at the end of the day, this is them endorsing you for a very specific graduate program. So you want to make sure it's tailored to that program, okay? And that is everything that I wanted to share today. I just want to remind you that writing your own letter of recommendation is not easy. I know it feels uncomfortable. I know it's a little bit odd, might even feel unfair. But if you reframe it, you are being given the opportunity and the control to write a letter that's strong, that's detailed, that's enthusiastic, and that shows just how amazing you are. So I hope that you can work on that draft, get that support, get those samples, and before you know it, you're going to be submitting it to your professor, and they're going to do their job of strengthening it too. You will get through this. So in any case, mucha suerte. Good luck with writing your own letter. And as always, I will talk to you all next time. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, here are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. The second way is to get your copy of my free resource kit linked in my show notes. This kit includes tools, worksheets, and podcast playlists on all things grad school, productivity, and personal development. The third way to support my show is to follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram with the handle @Grad School Femtoring and on LinkedIn by searching my name. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.